Hi, I'm Dr. Kimberly Moore, host of the Envision More Workforce Insight podcast. Join us as we explore workforce and leadership through an innovation lens with leaders from across the country in every industry. Whether you're in education trying to crack the code for workforce or industry seeking to address your workforce talent strategy, or maybe you just need to be inspired, we've got you covered. Tune in, save us as a favorite, and let's innovate together. Welcome to another episode of the Workforce Insights podcast. I am so glad to be joining you all today, and honestly, just so glad that you are joining us as well. Can you believe it? 10 countries, started less than a year, and here we go. An amazing guest, I might say, that we will have today. And of course, I want to catch you up if you are a first-time listener to Workforce Insights, that this is the go-to spot for executives across the country, whether you're in government, education, private sector, or nonprofits. We are at the intersection of purpose and working with leaders who have insights that really can close the gap. And today is no different. I am joined by the amazing founder, Sam Bernstein. He is someone that you will definitely want to add to your contacts. Sam, I'm so glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Moore. Really thrilled to be on the podcast.
Well, and you know what, audience, this is another name that you'll want to take down as well, Loper. Loper is the company that you will hear and that we'll get to unpack more, but I wanted you to save those two names up front. So, Sam, just to level set with our audience, I'd like to do what I call the lightning round and jump into some quick questions. Are you on board with that?
I'm on board. Let's do it.
Okay, so what's one word you've used to describe today's Gen Z student?
One word here, I would say introspective. And I think that it is one of the reasons I like that word for today's Gen Z students. I think there is this misconception that you have a TikTok generation that is just going from content to content to content, and it's thoughtless and it's a 6-second attention span. And yes, you do have, you need to capture this generation's attention. There's a lot that's in front of them, but I've been so impressed from my experience with Loper of how thoughtful this generation, truly introspective as they think about next steps in a really changing workforce, college culture, a lot of changes going around. I think they're seeing this, and I think we don't always give the generation enough credit for how introspective they are in thinking about what the right next step is.
I love how you just described that. So as we go into like this next round of it, the college or career pathway, we always hear this. So college or career pathway, what should students explore first?
In this, given that Loper is a dedicated, not quite dedicated, started as a dedicated college search product, maybe will be counterintuitive for some. I would say career pathway first. And I think it's great to start there and work back.
I love it. And so what's the biggest myth about college search you wish you could bust?
I wish I could bust that rankings are the most important thing. If I could pop that bubble, I wish I could. So the myth that, there is one set of rankings that you should be adhering to in ordering a school.
Oh my goodness, I love it. This is going to be a great conversation, listeners. So more helpful to a high school senior, a glossy mailer or a 5-minute video on their phone?
I will answer the question, but I will go circular quickly on that. A bad 5-minute video, it's much better to get a good glossy mailer than a bad 5-minute video, but I'm going to say a 5-minute video on their phone. Most important though of either of those is just the quality is better, because I've seen some 5-minute videos that will make me beg for any mailer, let alone a glossy one.
Okay, so just be mindful of that. And I know education, as we think about enrollments and targeting and recruitment, that, hey, listen to this, quality matters. So, and lastly, if you had 30 seconds to pitch Loper to a student in an elevator, what would you say?
I would tell that student, Loper, it's a free mobile app. We guide you the right next step after high school. In just 5 or 10 minutes, we can help you take those first steps and broaden your horizons to pathways that you may have never thought were open to you. So save time. Don't start with Google, start with Loper. That's what I would tell them. It's going to save you a lot of stress in the process. So I'd leave it there and hopefully get them to download the app and start exploring and see the value that we can provide.
I love that. And I know that I always, even though we're, our audience is executives across the globe, I would say that the parents, those on the other side, will definitely be taking this down and probably even using it themselves. So when I think about everything that you just said as we were unpacking through the lightning round, I'm just drawn to this first question and just getting to know you better that, you pivoted from hedge fund trading to launching an education startup during the pandemic, bold underscore. What sparked your leap into education and workforce space, and what lessons did you bring with you from the finance world?
Yeah, I think, you mentioned, you teed me up there in mentioning the pandemic, because that really was the start, at least, of the idea of Loper. And in a weird way, I was living in New York City in March of 2020, world shuts down, all my friends leave. The timing for me was actually in some ways quite nice, and that gave me a chance to take a step back. Pretty much all my friends left the city. Life shut down. And at that point, I had realized, very lucky to work in the trading role that I worked with nice people, smart people, grateful for that opportunity. But after a few years, I could tell you trading stocks is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I had that ability to take a step back. And, I think that being in New York at that time, there was such a visceral spotlight on inequality in a way that I had never seen in the US before. And, I listened to a podcast, to how I built this podcast. It was with Pat Brown, who's the founder of Impossible Foods. And it always stuck with me. He asked the question of, what's the biggest problem in the world I can work on solving? And for him, he was taking a sabbatical from what I believe was Stanford. He was a Stanford professor. I think it was Stanford. And for him, that was climate change by addressing factory farming with a meat alternative. And I certainly do not have a PhD to address any of that, but that framing really stuck with me. And, looking outside at, again, that very visceral spotlight and inequality, and then seeing what was happening from afar in the education space, where I view that shift in classroom learning to online learning, really accelerating question on what's the value of higher education. And I think the system not breaking, and there were challenges with content delivery. Do not get me wrong. I'm sure any teachers listening will be like, the system came very close to breaking. But if, we can innovate in content delivery, and this notion that, maybe you don't have to be in a classroom learning synchronously. Where can we start to improve operations, and what are other efficiencies in this sector that's by and large operated the same way? And where those two pieces, inequality and education, they meet for me is for all the issues with higher ed, and there are plenty, that jump from high school to what's next, that critical inflection for earnings, your earnings potential, social mobility. And I just really started to become obsessed with what those were. With what those answers could be. And so it was really like this long introspection process, and actually having the space to take a step back from day-to-day life and ask myself those questions. That was a big motivator for Loper. And in terms of that last piece on what lessons did I bring with me from the finance world, I think it's just like this ruthless honesty, where my first boss would always tell me, there's a scoreboard every day. And because at a hedge fund, you can see there's this amazing, you can see how did you perform against the market every single day. There's a scoreboard every day, and there's no way where to hide, at least in it's very much a meritocracy. And I think taking that into starting a business where it's like, you have to be brutally honest with yourself. You can't lie to yourself. You can't paint a picture, because if you're not honest with yourself, no one else will be. And it's been really important when asking, hey, are we sticking true to our mission? Are we actually executing the business that we set out to do so? And it's really hard, because this is an emotional investment when you start a company. And, certainly there's a lot of my own identity that ends up being tied in the business. And you have to be able to separate that out from to the best of your ability to make the right decision going forward. So that lesson on honesty and holding true to it is definitely something I took from the finance world.
And I think it's evident. I know in our initial conversations audience, you weren't privy to that one, but I'm certain that it's going to come out throughout our interview. Just this whole idea of curiosity and problem solving. I love that. And adding to that, the honesty. starting with self. So when I think about that, I think it's a great segue for, you've mentioned that being outsiders to higher education was like your superpower or your strength. How did that perspective influence how you designed Loper, and what were some early assumptions you had to challenge?
Yeah, I think where it was such a strength for us, and then allowing us to think about how to design Loper, was we weren't beholden to processes or systems or an optimization that was solving a problem. It's this weird way of not working in higher ed. I think it's very easy to then approach this, what we really view as a marketplace problem. You got students on one side, and I'm going to try and speak really broadly, institutions on the other, whether those are colleges, trade schools, employers, so on. And I think when you come from that higher ed background, it's very easy to end up thinking about that specific problem that you have that may or may not involve students, but it may or may not have students at the very center of it. And unfortunately, when I look at the recruitment landscape, I do look at a broken system in many ways that is not serving students effectively. And I think it's really easy to be tied into optimizations where you could be optimizing a very inefficient system. And, we're still small, we're growing at this point, but we really do want to reimagine what does it look like for a student to take that next step from high school into either post-secondary or directly into the workforce. So not having that framework where it could be an optimization was so helpful for us. And I think the perspective on how it influenced us designing was really just being able to put students first and say, okay, what is it like? What is our, what are the questions that we need to ask a student to start to influence what that pathway looks like? And then how do institutions play into it, and being able to flip that on its head? Very difficult to do. I think we can't talk to high school students enough. I think early assumptions, the last piece of that question, there were a lot. I think the biggest one that I had to challenge for myself was that I may be close to the process, but I'm not a high school student and I don't know exactly. And it kind of comes off that piece of, well, okay, we weren't beholden necessarily to what our, a specific way of recruitment or a specific process from working within higher ed, but we also aren't current high school students. And I have to constantly challenge that we don't have all the right answers. We don't know everything that's coming in, and we really can't talk to users enough. I think it's the most important thing that we can do to improve the product. Just talk to users, talk to current high schoolers. So I have to keep challenging that assumption for myself of like, oh, this is what I think a high schooler wants. Like, no, take I think out of it. You need to talk and listen. And what did a high schooler actually tell you? What did they say about the process?
I love what you just described about that, because again, I think the pandemic in and of itself forced us to look at innovation as our best friend, and looking at tradition. Tradition is great, but sometimes, you have to re-engineer, reimagine the possibilities. And I think that's what you've done. And when you say small, I think about the fact that you're in all over the United States with the number of students that you're serving. So it's just an amazing accomplishment. And I know that there's even more to come. But you also hit on something that when we think about it, that, you've said most recruitment tools put enrollment first and students second. What does, putting students first actually look like in practice? And how has it reshaped the traditional post-secondary discovery process?
Yeah. And what I'll say is we need to continue to ourselves improve in putting students first. And I am really excited, and I'm going to, answer the question and talk some ways where I think we can further extend that. But I think when you talk putting students first in practice, you need to just assume no knowledge over their preferences and what they're looking for. You need to allow them to actually action and express on a very granular level, this is what matters and is important to me. And then actually just follow on with almost that. In some cases, it can be like that dopamine release, but that gratification of, oh, okay, now I'm seeing content that's tied to what I said, this matters to me. Now I'm seeing content. This happened. And it's the best piece of feedback we get from students is I feel like Loper actually understands me. It took the time to understand me. And that can mean slowing down and recognizing, hey, there's a lot of these questions you need to work through. But for us, where it starts to extend, and I'm frankly really excited about this as a growth area for us, but I think about communications coming from higher institutions as marketplace, where we can do a better job is giving students, and I want to, there's some exciting things that we're working towards, but being able to say, how do I want communication from this specific school? What type of communication do I want? Because right now they're expressing what their interests are, and we're able to show them content based off that. But how do I want that content? How do I want information? What channel do I want it? Giving someone full control over this process. The different example, but think about yourself as a consumer and the number of texts and the number of emails that you get from different companies. I mean, heck, you go on any online website, it's like, oh my God, I just got 12 emails from them. I don't even know how to turn them off. And then you multiply that out by 30, and it's similar to colleges, almost like consumer shopping. Like, oh, I was shopping for a t-shirt. Next thing you know, I'm getting 15 emails. It's kind of like that when you're looking at I was looking for colleges. Now I'm getting 40 emails. Is too much. How do I process this? Being able to give that student complete control over who they're hearing from, when, what type of content they're getting, I think it just creates such a more savory buying experience, and where it actually, I really think benefits, and on that reshaping the post-secondary discovery process, you give students that level of control. It's actually a huge benefit for institutions because you can actually focus your time on students who want to hear from you, and you can understand how they want to hear from you, instead of just saying, we need a really wide top of our funnel, we need to try and reach everyone and hope that we pull students through.
It sounds like you've talked to a few institutions, because it's definitely the funnel and, hey, let's just shoot this out and we're going to do a campaign on that. And wow.
It's where, and on that piece of us being small, it's, I think that it feels like we're trying to push for system change on that front. And, I think we're in the really early innings from us as a product, but it just is going to take a lot of shouting this message out and continuing to grow and hopefully continue to build a product that students really love and find value with, because I think that's the best way to get institutions' attentions of, hey, this is working. This is what students want. And then allowing institutions to follow on, versus where I think a lot of these tools, it's, okay, we're going to solve a problem for that specific pain point in a recruitment funnel for an institution. And it's like, how do we fit students into that flow? And I just think it ends up optimizing, what I will call a broken system in many ways.
Totally. And again, I think the other piece of it that comes to mind for me is that the relationship and the cultivation and nurturing that you're doing to really understand the student. I could see institutions just around the country wanting to collaborate with you and using that same information, because why reinvent the wheel once you've done the due diligence on that? So institutions, as you're listening, and I know that a number of my education colleagues do listen to the podcast, and please do, if you're not the right person in the institution that you are sharing this is an important conversation to have. And, it makes me think about how creative and innovative you've been. I think about right now, Loper's mobile first social style platform is resonating with Gen Z. It just is. So how did you land on this design? And what can, when you think about government agencies, nonprofits, and even universities learn from your user engagement strategy?
Yeah, I will say, there was landing on this design. There were a lot of bad designs first. There were a lot of bad starts. Any good design.
Hear that first. It wasn't wow from zero to hero.
Yeah, I don't want to. It's and it's so easy to have that revisionist history of looking back of like, this is the.
I wrote it on the back of a napkin, and then it was voila. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of napkins were thrown out. Would be one way. It's funny because our design actually has recently changed, but one of those pieces, coming back to the pandemic and the introspection that I was doing, it's like, gosh, there's no technology that's really resonating with how students are consuming content elsewhere. So a lot of this motivation came from looking at, okay, well, where do we're not going to be as engaging or as exciting as Instagram, as TikTok, but what can we learn from those platforms? And initially, we really had a true dating app style, swipeable cards on the platform, very much looked like a Tinder or a Bumble interface. And part of that was for the speed. And big motivation there was, okay, we want to force an interaction from a user and do so in a really quick way. And there's nothing, and it's fun to swipe on your phone. Whether it's dating app or elsewhere, there's a lot of different products. It's just fun. There's something nice about just sitting on your phone scrolling. And then where we actually changed to more of this social media scroll-based style feed was we were forcing so many decisions from our users. It was feedback that we got. And that's, I can't say this enough. How we landed on this design was talking to a lot of students and getting them to play around with prototypes and look at it. But, change that we made fairly recently was, okay, we're having this problem where we're forcing students are getting stuck because they don't know, is it swipe right, swipe left? I'm not really sure. I want to be able to skip it. And there isn't really an intuitive skip interface when you're forcing this binary of swiping. And so we end up evolving to this scroll-based style feed where we're seeing much stronger engagement from it. And I think part of that is users are able to just scroll past what they don't care about and then actually focus their interaction and attention on what matters to them. And that also allows us to deliver much stronger content as a follow-up because we're only getting reactions to what actually is interesting to them. And that was a big piece in terms of what, whether it's government agencies, nonprofits, universities can learn from user engagement strategy. I would say speed is just so, and it's almost counterintuitive to the first thing that I said on this podcast on introspection, where it isn't introspective, but you've got to be quick to capture users' attention and pushing a value prop. We've actually seen from a lot of the content off platform that we're pushing out, the calls to action that resonate most with students right now are in 5 minutes, you can save, and this is language has changed, but in 5 minutes, you can save hours of time. Don't go to Google, don't spend time, just take 5 minutes and we can deliver you blank. And that sort of speed to value, I think really resonates with this generation because they'll do the introspection afterwards, but they don't want to be spinning in circles trying to figure out, is this actually important to me? Where should I spend the time? They want to be able to show, okay, great, this is what I was looking for. And now if I want to go spend the time afterwards, I at least have that starting point. So I think speed to value is so important for everyone. Because I think sometimes you look at marketing materials and look at information that's sent, and it's like, wait, I just read through this. I don't even understand. I still haven't gotten to the meat of it, and just deliver the value as quickly as you can.
That's so important because I know we're talking about, students and high school students, but I think what you just shared is just so critical. I was actually working with a colleague of mine on a product and they wanted my feedback. And part of it, I said, there's no way to stop the process. You got to continue on. There's no way to skip what's not important to you. And so the fact that you all have landed on that, I can see why your success continues to grow with Loper. And it makes me even think about, I know that you've written in the past that the training gap is bigger than the talent gap. So how do you see technology helping close that divide? And what are the implications for workforce policy and perhaps even talent pipelines?
This is a big question. This could be a podcast in and of itself on this question.
I got to invite you back. Virtual doors open. Yeah.
This is a big one. In terms of closing that divide, I think that delivering the literal training itself in technology, I think that I have thoughts on it, and I'm probably not the expert in the room to speak about how can technology improve content delivery. I think there is a component there, and I think there are much smarter people than me to talk about where that fits into their current training and improving current training processes. But I really, and this is where Loper sits, is that I think where technology can be most effective there is actually directing people to the right training. And that is, so I definitely don't want to overlook how it can affect actually delivering that training, content delivery there, but it's overwhelming right now to figure out, okay, if I want to get from A to B, it's really A, B, C, D, E. There's all these steps it feels like there's all these steps, and you again spin circles and get discouraged. But I think where technology really can be so important there is saying, okay, well, and maybe as we think about this on a more macro level, okay, there's a labor market shortage here. We can predict out, okay, we can see that we're going to have a shortage of X jobs. I'll use semiconductor industry is always my example of there's a shortage. I think it's like 50,000 high purity welders over the next 5 to 10 years. And you see massive investments from companies like Intel, and it's where are you going to get these highly skilled, highly skilled technical jobs, where are you going to train them? I think there's a couple pieces coming off that. One is there does need to be literal innovation. This is where I don't think technology can solve the answer, but we have to make sure there is enough training providers. It's one of the big concerns for me, because I think technology can be really good at directing and saying, okay, here is where you can actually get training for this career outcome. That's where I think technology can fit. But where I do think there is this gap right now still, and it's not solved by technology, is who is actually going to train that workforce. And I spent time, this is now like a little bit of an anecdote, but I remember spending hours one day on Google trying to figure out, okay, if I want to get this job, where can I go? Where would I start? I'm entry level. I'm pretending I'm a high school senior. I've never done welding in my life. Maybe I did one class in high school, but where would I go? What steps would I take? And it was really, really difficult, very convoluted. So I think technology can illustrate that gap. But where I'm concerned is, do we actually have the training providers right now? And that's that training gap for me, of do we actually have the training providers to then end up filling that talent gap? I think that you're going to need employers to step in a stronger way. I think you're going to continue to see there a lot of work done with 2-year universities. There's community colleges doing some incredible work to step in and adjust their programming. I think you're going to need to see more of that from 4-year colleges as well. But I think employers themselves, and that's where I think about a company like Intel, I think they're going to have to play a bigger role in not just upskilling their existing workforce, but training entry-level workforce into the positions they want to hire for. I look at technology there saying, great, show me the training providers, and we can really efficiently direct entry-level talent into these training pathways. But we, at least for Loper, we are not doing the training. We are not. We don't have the hardware. We got the easy job. You do the training. We'll direct you to someone who does the training. Like who is literally doing that training? It's a big question that I have, and I think that it's one of the pieces that I am maybe most concerned is probably the wrong language. But as I try and peer around the corner for Loper and what does next year look like? What does the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? We could continue to improve our efficiency in terms of matching and directing workforce. But if there aren't the training providers in place, or if there isn't the quality of training providers in place, it doesn't matter. But I do, I am an optimist. I do think those things are falling into place. And I do think people are ringing the alarm bells around, hey, there is just this growing and massive talent gap, especially in a highly skilled trades, that is only going to be exacerbated over the next decade. So I'm an optimist. I think people are stepping in, but that's the long answer with a winding path to get there.
No. I think that's great, because what this speaks to in terms of how you've laid that out, employers are taking a more active role in creating their workforce talent, both with the incumbent workers that they have in place, but realizing that if their businesses are to thrive, there must be a talent pipeline. So everything that you're saying about where will the talent come from, and that as great a job that you all can do and will do with directing, making sure that there is capacity and quality and institutions ready to receive is critical. So that's why I love Workforce Insights, because it brings, all the conversations are we're at the intersection. Yours touches the other groups and theirs touches your work. So we all need each other. And it makes me think about, based off of what we've talked about already, is that when you talk about or emphasize that talk to users as your mantra, love it. Can you share a story where student feedback directly changed your product or strategy? And I know that one in particular, how you've talked about engaging as a whole, like with these groups, where is there a student or so, that story that you're able to share that you're like, wow, we're onto something, and that maybe you then explored it further with other students. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, a good example here is something that we're actively working on right now, but really came from a smaller, what at the time was a smaller insight. So it wasn't necessarily, and it's one of those pieces as well, where, and I think this holds true in so many places across business, where it's like, you sometimes need to hear something 5 times, or sometimes you hear something and it's 3 months later, you get that little light bulb moment. Oh, this is where the puzzle pieces start to fit in. But it all came from, a user interview. And then we were talking about okay, and this is back within the realm of four-year colleges, but we were talking about, okay, Loper really is supporting the start initially, and we're starting to do more, but the start of your college search process and the introspection and the discovery. Using the app, watch them use it in front of us, and then starting to go through, okay, you match the school, and they were an older student. It's like, okay, well, the biggest pain points for me are working on writing essays. And it's like, okay, well, and we were starting to talk about how they could fit in with the mobile app of, okay, well, we match you to a school as our best fit. You can start to do your research. Okay, we can show the different essay prompts that are here. And we can do all these, all within the context of a phone. And users go, well, I'm not going to write my essay on my phone. I'm going to write my essay on a computer. And it's like, oh, okay. At the time, it's like, oh, that's a good point. Like, all right, nothing we can do about that. Let's keep going on with the conversation. But it ended up really sticking with me. And it's like, they're right. Like, I would never write I have a mobile app, but there are limitations. And, I had this, as much as, in an earlier conversation, talk about how important, pieces, why it's important on mobile and how it's influenced design. It's like, okay, there are some limitations to mobile, which was, maybe shouldn't have been a light bulb moment for me. It's like, okay, we need to go then create, and we returned and talk more to this user, and we're rolling out a web extension of Loper's mobile app, which we're so excited about, supporting both students and parents. And there are some huge insights from parents in that process too around what they're looking for. But it's great. Loper, our mobile app, can help you go through the introspection. We match you with best fit pathways. But when it gets to the point of application, and where I do envision this extending into non-college as well, where, job application too, or application to a training school, whatever that looks like, you're going to conduct that. You may conduct that through the website, if they're through a PC, I should say. And we've released this web extension where we can actually show students in a really clean spreadsheet all the different application requirements for a specific school, tasks associated with that school, and then they can actually link out, and whether it's Google Docs, wherever they're writing their essay, and then track all of those links in one place. And we think it's a really natural extension. We're giving parents visibility in that process with it too, which is one of the huge pain points they've had of just, hey, I'm not trying to be commandeering with my students. I'm not trying to, but I just want some type of visibility and support them, because we're talking about 17, 18-year-olds and keep them on track with dates and deadlines. So we're very excited about this web extension, but it all came out of this, what at the time felt like such a small comment of just going through what it was like, oh, what do you want to do on the app, and trying to understand what they're trying to do on the mobile app. They're like, I don't want to do it on my phone. I want to do it on a computer. And it took us a little while to come back to it, but we're so excited. And we think that, our CTO brought it up to me of, very few products end up having an extension to web, and where usually it's, oh, you either use your phone or you use a computer. And we're trying to build a product that really is natural for students to do exploration on their phone, that like to spend time on their phone, and then extend out to web when they need it. So, but it all came from what felt like a small user insight, and then returning them. It's like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. Like, there are just some things that you want to do on a computer.
Perfect sense. And as a matter of fact, it makes me think about this whole idea and notion of employers and their learning and development. Maybe that's your 3.0 of what you do, because oftentimes those individuals, they are removed from the education, and then knowing what it is that when an employer says, okay, let's do some upskilling or perhaps even reskilling, and it has to be external. I think about that audience. They're older, they're not recent high school graduates, but very similar in that guidance would be important. So who knows, 3.0. So you're operating in a space that overlaps with education and workforce, nonprofits, and even government initiatives. What have you learned about collaborating across these sectors, and where do you see like the biggest opportunities for alignment?
I have learned that patience is very important. And this is something that, coming back to that piece on coming from the world of finance into, the education sector, it's a big learning for me. At my old job, it was, you could just move as fast as you wanted.
You move at the speed of business, right?
You move at the speed of business, very flat hierarchy. You think something's important to spend time on, show someone that it is, and then they're going to basically give you a thumbs up and say, go do it. It just takes time. There are layers to this. And it's been, with collaborating across these sectors, having that patience and understanding that, there are a lot of different priorities here, and that it is not as simple as business outside of this space, I think is, feels very easy to me when I talk about it, because, oftentimes it's just profit that's the single motivator. And that is not the case. And for good reason, not the case. We talk about education, workforce, nonprofits, government initiatives. But when there isn't just that singular lens to view decision making, there ends up being more layers. And you just have to have patience and try and understand what are these specific motivators. What is someone trying to solve for when it's not just as simple as, can we earn more money from blank? So that piece has been with collaboration. It's been a learning experience for me, and just something I constantly trying to preach patience. But when I think about opportunities for alignment there, I really do think that, it comes back to labor market, like in what we were talking about earlier. I really do think there is a huge opportunity to build more alignment with talking about whereas in starting with government initiatives, and there are some states that are doing great things. Indiana is a state we work with pretty closely. Students, there are some amazing innovation with pushing apprenticeships within the state, trying to fill some of their own talent gaps. But I think thinking about, okay, how can we start with the outcome that we're working towards? And that may be the government initiative there. And looking at a state level, at a policy level, a labor market level, however you want to frame this is where we're trying to go. And then be able to work backwards and really trying to bring those other groups together to understand, bring the workforce in, like, okay, well, and then how does education fit in? And I think that there is a huge opportunity there of looking at where are our labor market needs and how can we start to put dollars and time behind aligning our education into a more linear path into those labor market needs over the next 5 to 10 years. Because you have a lot of education institutions that struggle with enrollment across sectors, and I think a huge way you can fix enrollment is if you are offering labor market ready, job ready programs, job training programs that align with those government needs. So I think there's a lot more there's a lot of opportunity for alignment. I think Indiana is a state I bring up. I think they're doing a great job in pushing things forward there, but there's a lot of room for growth there is what I see.
A lot of room for growth, and it makes, what resonates with me about your response is also that there's not just a singular path to do it, and that there has to be lots of tools in your tool belt when you're thinking about meeting workforce needs, whether it's apprenticeships or whatever that might be, or traditional training, or just a combination or hybrid. So I love that you're thinking in that way, but I also love that Loper, you've reached over 200,000 students across all 50 states. And I know that number is probably larger than what I got it just more recently. But how are you intentionally ensuring the platform supports equity, especially for students in underrepresented or rural communities? I know that I recently had a guest on Workforce Insights talking about rural colleges, and she's president, and just the great stuff that they're doing in Tennessee. But I mean, how has your platform really supported equity intentionally?
One of the biggest pieces is just assuming no knowledge in the process. And it's so easy to, without realizing it, introduce terms and introduce language that a student who may be a first generation college student, maybe is in a rural community where it's just not a college going culture, aren't talking about those things. And very quickly, without introducing the term in a way where there is an explanation, or there's a very easy click learn more, click see more, an info button. If you're forcing students on their own to go out and do the research just to understand what you're presenting them with content, you're sending this message that, oh, this is not for you. Oh, you don't know what this means. The message gets sent that it's not for you. And that is, I think, been the biggest piece where we can, by having a very accessible product for students, and part of that comes from having a free mobile app for them, where, first it's okay. It's very accessible. And then, content is resonant with how they consume content on other platforms, doesn't feel intimidating. It's not like, oh, I need to read 3 pages before I start this. It's all short form. But then just being able to really quickly and not almost introduce shame to the process of having to understand what something is when it's the first time you're exposed there. That I think is the biggest piece for us. And then the second piece is really recognizing that, and I usually will talk about this within the lens of first generation students. Our company's based in Chicago. A first-gen student in Chicago has completely different needs and understandings of the process than a first-gen student 3 hours south in rural Illinois. It is totally, totally different what that student is, their motivations for looking at colleges, what they define as a city. It's hilarious. You talk to a first generation student from Chicago, cities are going to be, Chicago, New York, LA, DC, and that might be it. And you talk to a first generation student 2-3 hours away, and, Peoria in Illinois is a huge city. And so it's just, I think sometimes without intending to, we end up just really grouping broad swaths of students in who do need to be segmented out and understands, okay, their needs, underrepresented can mean so many different things. And those different groups of underrepresented students are going to have different needs, and being intentional in serving them and not just trying to make a one size fits all. Okay, great. First generation underrepresented. This means this, and this is the content you see. This is the path you're on. So really trying to segment those out. And I'd say it's something that we can continue to do a better job of. And it comes back to talking to users on how we're going to improve.
I love it. And so how does, when I think about data and I think about technology, as much as we know that, technology is certainly leading the way, and we think about AI and, we just inevitably end up with questions. So how does Loper use data and AI to personalize career and college matches? And then probably the follow-up would be, and what ethical considerations guide how you use that data for good?
Yeah. I think the simplest piece on ethical considerations and can return to is just, one, data privacy and data security is so important. So that is, that's where I need to have the guest lecture with our CTO come on and talk about securing data in transit, in RAS, and the policies we have in place before I trip over myself saying them. But the first things first is security and user privacy, and trying to also just be really, really clear with how we're using that data and understanding, putting it in plain language, having really clear opt-in policies. Those pieces are important. But return to that first question on how we're using data and to personalized college and career matches, what I think we've done in a fairly elegant way here is actually train a model, starting with a foundational model, and then training that on a set of information specifically about colleges and career pathways. And what we're trying to do there is, if we just relied, because, I get this question less today, but sometimes, 2 years ago, I'd get this where it's, well, why can't ChatGPT, why can't a student just go on ChatGPT? And why can't they just rely on this foundational model to deliver recommendations? And what happens is, that foundational model has billions of parameters, and it's going to be heavily biased towards schools where it has access to greater quantities of information. And so you end up with this huge bias towards large schools, Ivy League schools, and basically whatever. It's this perpetuating motion of whatever's written about most, whatever's most accessible on the internet. And those are going to be all the matches. And we thrive in the granularity. So training that model on this really granular data set of colleges, and then we actually will prepend the context window, and this starts to get a little more technical with all of these preferential data points about our users. And so what we're able to do, maybe try and bring this into, before I veer off one direction, bring it back towards more layman's terms here, is you can almost think about having, on one side, you have this specifically trained data set on institutional data, and then we're learning a ton of granular pieces because you have hundreds of data points as our users are reacting to prompts on our app. And then we're able to use those to then assess across the institutional landscape, okay, which of these schools is a strong fit, and then actually personalize what about that institution or about that career pathway is a fit for a user based on what they said. And that's one of the pieces I know users have told us has been so valuable, is when we deliver a match, we're actually able to tell them, here's why this is a good match for you. Here's what's a good fit. And, to return now to that piece on the ethical considerations on guiding, using that data is, I talked about data security, but we need to make sure that we aren't just taking that user information and that we aren't essentially introducing bias into this process where it's, okay, you said that you are interested in basically we don't want to create the self-perpetuating motion where we are funneling certain types of users, certain pathways more and more and more, and making the decision on, actually based off historical data, it's this tricky piece, based off historical data, you're more likely to be interested in something, but that doesn't mean that you are destined to be interested in that. And I think on an individual user, and that's where, it isn't so much an issue now, but as the model continues to improve, as we continue to capture more data, we're going to be able to be incredibly intelligent with our predictive abilities for what a certain type of student will be interested in. But we can't assume that just because there's a higher probability that that student is interested in it, that it is destined to be their interest. So we still need to be able to show multiple different matches, still have that exposure, and allow on an individual level that user to affirm, yes, this is what I'm interested in, before just making that decision ourselves. So it's tricky. I won't pretend that it's easy, but we're really excited about the work, and just super, super excited with the early feedback that we've gotten from users and signal that we're starting to see here.
I just could imagine this, especially when I think about secondary institutions just across the United States. And when you compare the number of advisors/guidance counselors that are in place versus the number of students who need the support, that this becoming a very valuable tool. Listeners, and I know that I've interviewed on Workforce Insight superintendents and the likes across the country. So hearing this, I'm hoping that you all will consider this as an option because, again, to supplement the work that is happening, but thinking about it at scale. What do you think? I mean, this is another question, Sam, what do you think the post-secondary search process will look like 5 years from now? I know I'm asking you to pull out that crystal ball, but what do you think it's going to look like 5 years from now? And how will tools like Loper help shape the future?
I will say, first off, I hope it looks a little different than it looks today. I hope it looks better, and I hope the different is good. I hope different means better. So, I think it's going to, I'm very confident it'll look different. I guess I hope that it's going to look better than it does today. One piece at a high level, and it comes back to what we've talked about, is I think this will be much less focused purely on college. I think that in one way, really where we hope that Loper can shape that future is this ability to compare a 4-year college from 2-year college, from a trade school, from direct to workforce pathway, an apprenticeship, whatever it is, all side by side, and not assume in a silo I'm either looking at colleges or I'm looking at apprenticeships. You can actually make that comparison and figure out which of those pathways is best for you, or maybe multiple are viable. And I think that's something that's lost, is that there are multiple. There's not one way to get from high school into career. There's multiple different viable paths, and for an individual student, multiple might be viable. So I think there will be a greater openness to evaluating across options and making those comparisons and not just thinking about it within one specific pathway. That's one area where I think Loper will really help. But I hope that the search process, and this comes back to your piece on what you just mentioned with counselors, and there's a counselor shortage, is I'm hoping that human intervention in this process is really focused, is so much more. It's not, hey, how does this process work? And okay, let's take the first initial steps and build a broad list. I'm hoping that it's very much like blocking and tackling. And I mean that actually in a very positive sense here, of technology actually getting an individual student to a point where they need to have a conversation with a human being and actually work out and get that expertise, where yes, technology and where AI can do a lot of good here, but there's so much value in actually talking to a human when you get this is a critical decision here, and putting our counselors and other human beings in the highest leverage situations possible. Right now, I see counselors spending time in what, if I think about my finance background, would be described just as very low leverage work, where it's okay, it's the same question that you're answering 30 different times, 40 different times. your time is your most valuable commodity. How can we maximize it? So I think it's going to be a process that is much more open to different pathways, comparing across pathways. And I hope that technology ends up putting human beings in a position to really be doing high leverage, individualized work. And like, how amazing would that be if you think about a counselor's day and their 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever it is, it's like highest leverage question for a student A, then student B, then student C. And technology has gotten them to the point where, great, you know where a student is. It doesn't take you very long. You don't have to have this 30-minute, hour-long conversation just to get to base level. And you are just solving the real challenge for that individual. That's where I hope we can get to in 5 years. We will see. I'm more often wrong than I'm right.
Yeah, well, you know what? I am confident. I am confident both in your work and just the whole notion that technology is not an either or, it's an and in partnership with human talent. So I love that. And I can't believe that we're actually coming up on the last question. And I will say to you, virtual, when I think about my virtual audience that's out there, all the listeners of Workforce Insights, we will leave that virtual door open for Sam when he wants to come back and talk to us more and bring us up to speed, because this has been a great conversation. And I know that's one that you're going to want to not only share, but listen to again. So last question, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs, educators, or even government leaders trying to create meaningful change in how young people discover and prepare for their futures?
The last question is, is this should be the easiest one, but there's a lot of advice that can be given out there. There's a lot of advice, and there's a lot more that a lot more questions and advice that I'm looking for myself in many places. I think what one of the big pieces here, and it comes back actually to that very first piece that I had on this podcast about Gen Z being introspective in this process, is give students more credit in how thoughtful they are with this process. And I think that it is, it's their futures. And I think that is so motivating for an individual, but I think it ends up cutting through just a lot of the noise in this, and, give students more credit that they're being really introspective. And I don't want to just go back and say, talk to users again. But it is important to talk to students here. Just giving them more credit that, they actually are really thinking critically about this themselves. And they may be asking all of the right questions right now. And you may spend a lot of time talking to people who are other entrepreneurs, other educators, other government leaders here, and how can we make change? But what students may be feeling is not always reflected by what that conversation is. And I just give them a lot more credit that they're thinking here, and really listen to them, because I just sometimes see conversations in the space and it's like, wow, that's like really disconnected from it. It looks good on paper. It seems like that's going to be a good solution, but this may just not reflect what students are thinking about and talking about amongst themselves and how they're feeling. So give them credit for being a lot more thoughtful in this process. And I just think you'd be shocked by what you can take away from those conversations, and recognizing, hey, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old really is thinking deeply about this. And it's deeply personal for them, because it is, again, their future here. So have those conversations, give them credit. It is not something that will be solved in isolation by the quote unquote adults in the room. Students are going to need to be brought into it themselves.
So bottom line, value the voice. Value the voices that we hear in our space. So Sam, thank you so much, and Loper, for just what you are bringing to this process and to this space. You have been an amazing guest. I look forward to inviting you in. Workforce Insight listeners, thank you so much for joining us yet again. Again, 10 countries. We're excited to go even further, and we know that we can. Please remember to like, share, and of course, subscribe. Until the next time, bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Workforce Insight podcast, powered by Envision More Consulting Group, where we bring your bold visions to life. Remember to subscribe, share, and stay tuned for more insights on navigating the world of workforce and leadership. Until the next time, be bold, be great, and let's innovate.